Hi, Darcy. Nice to meet you.
You too, James.
I'm new here, and it's the first time we've met. But but I understand that you have a long relation with the HPO.
I have a very long relationship with it. Actually, my father was the conductor of this orchestra in the late 60s, probably 65,
Oh, that's right,
66.
Lee
Yeah.
Hepner,
Yeah.
right? Yes.
He also conducted the opera here at the time, which is where I got my start playing the Bell and Carmen, when they get off work,
Okay, interesting.
as a 5-year-old or something. Yeah. So a long history with this orchestra and this room, which I started working in professionally in the 70s with B.B. King, and a lot of people came through at the time. And when I walked in here, this smell in the air reminded me of so many of the shows that we had done. It was a spectacular room to me.
And so, how this specific concert of like doing music of James Bond came to be?
That happened because I was doing Beatles shows. We did 4 concerts of the music of the Beatles here. And just before I did the last one, I was out to lunch with a friend of mine who leaned over at lunch and said, you should do a show of the music of James Bond. And my response to him was, do you know how much work that would be? And he said, yes, I do, but I know what you get like when you're bored.
Right. Yeah.
So Kim asked me what I would like to do after the Beatles, and I said, well, how about Bond, not realizing how much work a lot of work was. So that was 2 years ago.
Yeah. Well, because the thing is, actually, funny story. One of my first introductions to classical music is through James Bond. And I remember when I was a kid, my parents, they're not musicians, and they have nothing to do with classical music in any capacity, and they had very, very few recordings at home that was classical music, but they had this one recording of movie music. And so you had a little bit of all kinds of movies, and there was this one track, a specific arrangement or version of Goldfinger for just orchestra.
Yes.
That I got stuck in when I was maybe like 5 or 6, and that I was listening over and over again because I just loved the brightness and all these colors and the lush harmonies and all that. So it's really, I can see the appeal of that music, of course, and I also find it really, because I thought it was symphonic music. I didn't know the difference back then, and so I was curious to have your opinion about that. Like, why do you think the music of James Bond specifically is so appealing to audience, and why is it really a score that stuck in people's head?
Well, you mentioned Goldfinger, which is a pretty good jumping off place because the original composer for those films was John Barry, who I'm a huge fan of. So he was brought in right at the very beginning. He wasn't the first composer they hired, but he was the first composer whose music they used. And so they brought him in for Dr. No and From Russia with Love. Finally, for Goldfinger, they gave him the opportunity to also write the theme. So at beginning, he only wrote underscore. But they said, well, why don't you write the song? And he had wanted to do that. And he had had a hit record in London that actually sounded like the James Bond theme, similar guitar and all of that. And that's how they went to him. So he wrote this, he wrote the theme. And actually, it's everything in his music always has something that breaks a rule. Like there's everything in it, like when you say Goldfinger, ba, ba, the main theme, but the trumpets are going ba ba ba. So the major third in the melody that they're playing is going against what would be the fifth of the chord it goes to. So it's like the fifth and the sharp 5 happening at the same time. It creates a clash and a tension.
So you mean the harmony is very daring in many
always
ways.
was.
Yeah.
Even the second. So this is the second quarter from Russia with Love. Defines the song, but it's a minor major 7 chord. And if you were to hear it play it just with minor, it doesn't make sense. So he had something in every piece that is part of the key to unraveling why that has a unique fingerprint, So John Barry, I think, set the tone for all of it, and Goldfinger was the one. So many songs after that had to copy that to sound like Bond. License to Kill is based on that. The Adele one is absolutely based on that. They all come back to his chord changes. Like, I hope he's getting publishing for a lot of that stuff, because if you don't sound like John Barry, it doesn't sound like Bond.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely one of the most famous movie composers, like up there with John Williams, and also, so the thing also with like James Bond is such a huge saga. Like there is countless movies, and how do you? And a lot of the musics, like the themes and the scores, even those that are not, the Skyfall is from Adele.
Right, yeah.
And how do you go on about when you have to decide the program for this kind of concert? How do you choose the pieces? I assume there is a big part of choosing the things that people know and love, but are you also sort of thinking about, well, that specific theme song is maybe not as known, but I think it's really interesting, and so I want to bring it to the audience?
That's a very compelling question, because I had to go through that process in choosing the program to come up with 23 different pieces from that canon, let's call it. To be honest, I chose the ones I liked best first. And sometimes they were underscore, so there were not themes. They were orchestral music that sat behind a scene that I always thought was compelling, like a helicopter scene in On Her Majesty's Secret Service where they fly over the Alps. And somehow he was able to capture the majesty of the mountains in this music, and you can feel the air and the cold and a lot of things. It's actually brilliant. And then there are love themes that are wonderful. And then there are songs you have to do. And then when you get all of those laid out, you still don't have quite enough time to do a full show. Like if I did all my favorites, I would not have enough time to do my favorites, enough favorites to fill that time, pardon me. But then I start looking at things that people liked and that were successful. And in the process, I actually found some really great songs that I hadn't paid enough attention to, that actually had a lot more going on than I thought. The one that Bono and The Edge wrote, I have to sing the whole song in my head.
Yeah.
Excuse me while I... boom.
Well, that's
Goldeneye.
Because
Goldeneye. And brilliantly written, and Tina Turner sang it, and it was just a seat of the pants thing. They didn't really have a plan. They didn't really have a song, and she just came in and she delivered it and made it what it was. And that turned out to be one of my favorite arrangements, actually.
Yeah, and one thing I think that is also sort of trademark almost of these Bond songs is that they always or almost always feature famous singers of the times or famous artists. And so you have Adele, you have Sinatra, and so on and so on. And so what was your approach here, where, how did you, so will we have singers, and if yes, how many, and how did you pick them, if you picked them, and so on?
Yeah. Well, I have 23 pieces, of which I believe 15 of them are vocal features. So most of those Bond songs were sung by women. Except for just a few. So I have 4 women and 2 men singing. You mentioned Frank Sinatra, which is interesting because Frank Sinatra never sang a Bond theme, but he was supposed to.
Right.
He was supposed to sing Diamonds Are Forever, but somehow changed his mind. And it's an interesting story because John Barry's 3 days away from recording it, and they're in L.A. recording it, and he walks in for breakfast, and Shirley Bassey is sitting at the table having breakfast, and he comes over and says, "Can you help me out?" So that wasn't written for her, but she stepped in and sang it. For this show, I have 6 wonderful vocalists. I have Heather Bambrick, who's a well-known jazz. I mean, first of all, you have to find somebody who can sing Goldfinger.
Yes.
It's like casting. Who can actually sing these songs?
Right, because you want this huge ringing voice that...
and so and that one was kind of scary for me because this is a powerful song to sing, and I happened to work with Heather last summer, and it became very obvious to me she could sing anything. So she's singing a few songs on this concert, but specifically and excitedly, Goldfinger is one of them. Mary Mackay, who I used, or she goes by Queen Pepper, I used for the Beatles shows, is very powerful. She's actually singing Golden Eye. And then Susie McNeil, who sang with Pink and Aerosmith and Steve Tyler, is she singing a couple? My daughter Camilla is singing too.
Oh, all
which
right.
is really thrilling to me, because this will be the third generation of my family to work with this orchestra.
Right.
So just the connection to my daughter having that experience is really meaningful to me. And then I have Jeremy Wright, who I worked with in the Beatles show. Of course, he's going to sing McCartney's Live and Let Die, and one other one. And then John Newdorf, who's a jazz singer who can sing From Russia with Love. And another one hard to cast, Thunderball.
Right.
Tom Jones, a very powerful performance. So some of these are, the personality of the singer was so strong that having powerful orchestration is great, and having the right singer.
And so, what do you think it is that people like the most about James Bond's music in general? Is it the sort of not traditional, but the aspect of every James Bond movie we are gonna discover a new music? There is some almost kind of cultural phenomenon around that, right?
There is.
But what else do you find really appeals to people in the music of James Bond?
Well, I'm not exactly sure that there's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, I went to see my first James Bond movie probably when I was about 9. And I was my father was a conductor, and he would always go to Munich. He would conduct there, and so we went over that summer, but we could fly over, but we couldn't afford to fly back, so we had to take a boat.
Right.
Which was cheaper in those days, which is hard to believe. But they showed From Russia with Love in the cinema in the boat. I watched it in the afternoon. I lost track of time. It was I'd never experienced, especially I think I was 9. I'd never experienced anything like that. And so I started reading the books, and I collect the books. I have all the first editions of the British ones, and so my first instinct is to go with the books. But what I'm trying to say, I suppose, is it's a very long tradition. Mm-hmm. So the books go back 70 years, the movies go back just over 60. Mm-hmm. So we build on that with the songs and the themes. The Bond theme is from like 61 or 62. So over that period of time, it's gained momentum. And then, as you said, they've had some of the finest singers on the planet roll through there and sing on these things. And so it's a cumulative. And then each time the new movie comes out, there's a song. I don't care for them all. Right. I'd vote a couple of them off the island, and I did. But some of them are really extraordinary. I don't know why it's popular. I think it's connected to the history of it, to the excitement, especially the early movies.
All the aspects play a role.
And it's you can't carry the movie around, but you can listen to the music. You know.
Right. Well, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure, James,
for coming here. And well, I'm not gonna see the concert, but I wish I could.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm not gonna be around. But I'm hoping you're gonna have fun with our band.
I'm already having fun,
and I'm sure that the audience will. For sure.
Yeah, they're always great. It's a pleasure, really.
Good. See you around.
Okay, I hope so.